What's good, homies? Welcome to the Drafts and Draughts podcast. I'm Joe, aka Sultan. No Dave yet again. 5 straight solo pods. He's going to be back soon. Don't know when. It's going to surprise you. Um, but yeah, it's Sunday, November 17th, and we have got some football on today. Normally, not a weekend show, but it's week 11, and we're coming up on the trade deadline. So we thought it would be great to go through some moves that you should be trying to make at or before your deadline to not only set yourself up for a chance to maybe go on a run and win your seasons, but also potentially buy low on some distressed assets or make some savvy dynasty moves heading into your off seasons. Now, again, most of the analysis we do today is going to be one quarterback focus. So a lot of the valuations and trade proposals we advise on are going to be one quarterback values, but a lot of these trade targets can be obviously targeted in superflex leagues too. Just keep in mind that the value is going to be a little bit less in superflex. If I say somebody's worth a late first in one quarterback, it's probably worth more like an early to mid second in superflex, unless it's a quarterback, in which case double their value. But before we get into it, it's time for a draft review. And today I've got the Onyx Monarch coffee. It's 9:30 in the morning East Coast time. I'm not going to be drinking a beer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit of coffee. I got introduced to this coffee when I was in Arkansas, actually visiting Dave. It's a blend of natural Ethiopia and washed Latin American coffees. It extracts a fruit-forward classic espresso or a dark filter coffee. It's got notes of dark chocolate, sorghum, cherry, dried berries, thick and syrupy. I totally recommend you guys try it. I got my first time ever buying bean coffee and grinding it myself. I feel like this is like the midlife crisis of you either become a meat smoker, a World War II historian, or a coffee bean snob, and that's the path I'm choosing. So again, cheers to you coffee drinkers out there. Hope to get this show out before the 1:00 games today. Oh, it's so good. But yeah, with that, let's get to the OTQ. One tough question today is, and it's applicable to today's show, but how do you decide when to push the chips in and when to become a seller at the deadline? What prompted this OTQ for me was I was asked what I would be looking to sell CD Lamb for, because for those of you who don't know at home, I have CD on our one quarterback dynasty league. The people don't forget dynasties, the PDFDL, as we sometimes refer to it as. What would I be looking to sell CD Lamb for with Dak Prescott out for the year and the potential for him to be putting up lackluster performances, or what should I look to be selling him for? And what I responded was I'd sell him for the exact same I would have sold him for last week. And maybe that's ill-advised process. Maybe that's, selfish process, or, convenient that it's my player that I wouldn't sell any less for him. But the way I play Dynasty is I don't believe in selling out to win a championship. I want to build a dynasty. So to me, Lamb is worth the exact same as he was worth last week. I think I wouldn't sell him for anything less than a deal that involved JJ, Chase, Neighbors, Puka, Garrett Wilson, Drake London, AJ Brown. That's the only suite of players I would possibly sell him for, or a running back package that involved, Bijan, Gibbs, Breece Hall, Ken Walker, Devon Achane, Saquon. Like I would not move CD Lamb in a deal to get Tyreek Hill or to go get I don't know, Devontae. I can't even think of who's like an older guy who's producing right now. I feel like everyone near the top of the league is pretty young right now. So I just couldn't possibly. And Nico would be a potential trade target. But again, what Nico owner is going to trade him straight up for Lamb right now if they're trying to win? So that's kind of the way I think about it. What would dictate me deciding if I'm going to push the chips in or not would be if I had my own first. If I don't have my own pick, then I'm kind of already pot committed to this season. And if I am a fringe playoff team, I am pushing my chips in a little bit further just because the idea of giving somebody else an early draft pick shakes me to my core. So I would be looking to add to my team wherever I possibly could, and not in a way that would break my future of my team. But if I could consolidate some of my bench pieces to make sure I could make a push for a playoff run right now, and maybe it makes my team a little more fragile going forward, I'm going to do that. And inversely, if I'm looking at the deadline, I'm looking at my upcoming schedule, and I have a suite of picks for next year, and I don't think it's sensible for me to try to push my chips in to win, I'm probably going to become a slight seller at the deadline, mostly just selling off your obvious sell candidates to contenders. Because at the end of the day, you do want to win championships, but I'm never pushing my chips in for a single championship. To me, I want to build a dynasty. I would rather have a team that gets me to the buys or a top 4 finish 3 or 4 straight years than push all my chips in, win one championship, and then struggle to even get into playoffs for 3 years after that. Like, to me, that's not fun. I want to have a competitive team every year. But all right, let's get into the trade deadline deals. And as I kind of already started talking about, I think it's first important to highlight the thought process at the trade deadline. And I think there are so many perspectives that you could talk about, because unlike in redraft, there are so many things you can do with your team year round and throughout the season, especially even if your team's not playing well. You don't have to make these dramatic tear downs to try to hit, strike dynamite, catch lightning in a bottle, and go on a playoff run. You can start to mail it in for next year and start planning for your future of your franchise. Whereas in redraft, if you're 3-7 right now, you got to make either a dramatic move or you can just delete the app off your phone. Like, there is no real moves to make. So first and foremost, if you feel like your team is set and you don't need to make any deals, well, then obviously this show isn't for you and you probably aren't even watching anymore. But if you feel like your team has some holes in it, you probably fall loosely into one of 4 quadrants. But keep in mind, each of these quadrants will have certain permutations. Like one I'm going to talk about later is a non-competitive team that still has your own pick. Now, that could be an old team a non-competitive team that does not have its own pick. Now, that could be an old team where all the assets we expected to be elite coming into the year have sucked, like Mahomes, Devontae, Tyreek, Christian McCaffrey, whatever. Or that same exact team could be a young team that thought they were going to be great, but suffered a bunch of injuries and underperformances. Like if you had Puka, Nico, Rashee Rice, Jonathan Brooks, Travis Etienne, etc. Those, you would have felt like you had a really strong core coming into the year, might have sold your first in a deal to go get Rashee Rice, and then you just were gutted. But the last variant of that could be a completely gutted team that has a few assets. In each of those teams situation constructs, the team that's not competitive right now and doesn't have its own pick, the trade options are going to be different for each of them. So keep in mind that when they fall into 4 quadrants, they're going to be permutations off those quadrants. So obviously I can't cover every single team's specific trade scenarios. So I'm going to do my best here. But the first quadrant is probably a contending team that still has its own pick. I'd put this in the top right corner of the quadrants if I were to draw a graph, because that's the most ideal situation to be in. You are probably 7-3, 8-2, at least 7-win team. And you still have the security of having your own pick, which gives you a bullet in the chamber if you're running into, like the aforementioned CeeDee Lamb is struggling. You can use CeeDee Lamb in a first and go get Jamar Chase. Maybe I wouldn't advise that, but you have that bullet in the chamber if you need, or you could just send a first for a guy like Debo and say, I feel safer running Debo out there the rest of the year. I mean, I saw this morning, George Kittle's not expected to play. That's wheels up for Debo Samuel. He's probably going to smash. Now, the hard part here is what obviously I would advise is to leverage sending your own first to solidify your playoff squad. But keep in mind, your pick value is worth nothing compared to what it was in the preseason. All those guys you could have bought for a first in the preseason, because there's some speculation baked into where your pick could fall, are no longer going to make that exact same trade, because now your pick is probably guaranteed to be 109 to 112. So all those analysts that are constantly saying, hold on to your picks until your midseason and your team is materialized. Well, congrats. Your first has never been less valuable than it is right now if you're an 8-win team. So it's this weird conundrum of all these analysts say, I want to wait and see how my team's doing before I send the first. And then they wait 10 weeks and they say, now I'm going to send that first for, Saquon. It's like, well, now Saquon's not worth that first anymore. In preseason, maybe he was. Now, the Saquon owner is probably a contender too. And if they're not, they're selling to the highest bidder, and it's certainly worth more than one single late first. Not to mention, now you're only getting a guy for 7 weeks instead of the full 17. So I don't really, as much as like I do think, holding your first is important. If you're looking to send a first for a player, waiting till the midseason is probably the least you get the least value extraction out of that first if you do that. If you had sent that single first in preseason, you would be reaping the rewards of that player for a lot longer than the last 7 weeks of this year. Doesn't mean it's not going to work. But so again, my advice to a contender who still has their own pick is you don't have to, but if you're looking for a move to make, expending that first is the top priority. Next is a contender that doesn't have its own first. That quadrant would be above the y-axis, the left quadrant probably. Still in a good situation. You always want to be contending. I think fantasy football is so random that if you can contend every year, you should. I feel like after going through a rebuild myself once, realizing absolutely anything can fucking happen in playoffs. Why are we going through these massive, crazy 2-3 year rebuilds only to miss on a pick or have a player get hurt, and then we come out of our rebuild going, man, I thought I was going to have this juggernaut team, and instead I'm just an 8-6 team scraping my way into playoffs and hoping to get lucky, just like everybody else. So I'm a firm believer now that I'd rather reload than rebuild. My goal will probably be going forward to sell guys a couple years too early, then wait till the very end. And if that means I lose some production and or lose some value, well, so be it. But I'll be willing to take that hit when it comes to it. So contender without their own first is fine. You need to creatively package up some of your depressed assets, your injured assets, in order to fill holes on your roster, especially if you have a competitive team that doesn't have your own pick. You want to, especially if you're a competitive team that's not guaranteed a playoff spot, you should be doing whatever you can to truly give yourself the maximum chance to win each week, like making specific moves on a weekly basis to win. Nothing matters more than the win this week. If you're a 5-5 team, you're a 4-6 team, you're a 6-4 team without your pick. Especially if your league's like ours, like where it's not a least max points for determined draft order, but a lottery, and ours is where the consolation bracket helps decide it. My gosh, I would be doing whatever I could to make playoffs. Nothing worse than missing playoffs and also playing so well that you win the consolation bracket and give somebody else in your league a great pick. I mean, it's not the end of the world. You can still build a good team, but it's kind of a shitty feeling. And I would hate to, not push my chips in to try to win. So this is the team that I think we kind of talked about earlier, a contender that doesn't have your own pick. I know we talk about non-contender, but anyways, and we'll talk about some deals to make. Next quadrant is a not competitive team, but has your own pick. I'd put that below the y-axis, but to the right. So it's still a decent situation to be in. I call this the rebuilder or the unlucky team. But you should be willing to sell some of your competitive assets below market value in order to, one, improve your own draft pick quality if you are a least max points for team, and if you're currently in line to get the 104 or 105, but selling off a guy like Tony Pollard or, Derrick Henry can potentially inch you closer to that 103 and 102. That by itself is value created for your squad. And then also, if you feel like your team is so far away from competing that it's maybe not a 25 run, but a 2026 championship run, then sell that asset now, because it's definitely not going to be if it might not contribute next year and definitely not going to contribute in 2026, you should be almost willing to sell at all costs. I don't see the point in holding on to a guy like Keenan Allen or, Devontae Adams for a third at this point. If you're not, maybe not a third, but go sell him for Quentin Johnston. Go sell him for, some sort of young player who's maybe not doing anything right now that you're like, well, at least this is a lottery ticket, because Devontae Adams is no longer one. You could sell that guy for Malachi Corley or Jermaine Burton, like even that type of player where they've done nothing, but they're young and have upside. I would do it. And the last tranche here is the bottom left quadrant of this. The worst place to be. It's a non-competitive team that doesn't have its own pick or doesn't have many assets. This team's fucked. You shouldn't be in this position, but here you are. You need to make dramatic creative moves where if you only have a couple elite assets, you're sitting on a dumpster fire team, but you have Justin Jefferson, or you have Bijan Robinson from a couple of years ago, or you have, you lucked your way into Brock Bowers. I'm sorry. You may say, oh, but this is the guy I got to build my team around. Like, brother, you don't even have fucking any assets to build with. You need to be breaking up an asset like that and trying to take multiple darts and throw them at the board. Yeah, you hit on Brock Bowers, but what you need to do now is you need to sell Brock Bowers for multiple firsts and Theo Johnson or Ben Sinnott and hope that all three of those assets hit. The only way to turn a franchise around like that, since you don't have picks next year, is to take your elite dynasty assets and break them apart into multiple assets and hope they all hit, because you cannot build a team around one asset, even in a shallow starting lineup like mine. So we're 15 minutes in. Let's dive into the trade targets. So I pulled together a list of about 15 to 20 guys to target. I pulled together some really good stats for the first maybe 10 of them, and then I have a list of just a few more guys I want to rattle off, along with some sell candidate guys. Again, not going to go. I'm trying to keep this a little shorter, but so the first and I don't know if I should be disclosing when I own any of these guys, because I feel like sometimes you guys think I'm trying to pump up my own players. So maybe I'll start disclosing so that you guys know I'm being transparent. I feel like I'm, Kramer on Mad Money, where he has to talk about the stocks he owns in his portfolio. But yeah, so the first guy I have on the list here is Terry McLaurin. I don't own him. He's 29 years old. He's currently putting up a top 5 PFF. Oh, the first category is cheap competitive pieces. And when I say cheap in air quotes, because it's all relative, of course, but compared to the other players putting up these caliber of scoring, these guys are cheap. So Terry McLaurin is the first one on my list. He's 29 years old, and he's putting up a top 5 PFF grade season this year. Not to mention he's got a 2.42 yards per route run, which is in the top 15, I want to say. So he's putting up 15.2 points per game. But since week 3, when presumably Jaden Daniels got up to speed, he's averaged 17.5 points per game, which is in line with your guys like Neighbors, Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Granted, I did not remove anomalous games from other guys' averages. So it's hard to just say, oh, if you just take away these first 3 games for Terry McLaurin, he's wide receiver 5. Well, also, if you take away one bad game for Chase and one bad game for some other guy. So I'm not going to do that, but let's just say he's probably a top 15 wide receiver, a fringe wide receiver 1, a high-end wide receiver 2 on every week basis. I know this past Thursday night was a crazy dud game, but I mean, Quinyon Mitchell seems to be him. It's Mitchell and Christian Gonzalez are the 2 new cornerback. They're the Legion of Boom, but on different teams or whatever. But anyways, back to Scary Terry. He's tied to Jaden Daniels for at least another season. He'll be 30 next year, but call him a young 30. He's a spry, wily veteran. I don't think he's ever won off his elite athleticism or speed, so I'm not looking at him as like a guy where age is going to be a problem for his play style. He's a complete wide receiver. I think he would age gracefully. I'm going to count on him to be productive for at least another season. The ideal price for him would be 2 seconds. But it's probably going to cost you a first and a second, or a second and a good young asset, like a first round caliber quality prospect, like a Keon Coleman or a Ricky Pearsall, and a second probably gets it done. And if I guess the other move would be if Terry's on a team that's completely down bad, you can probably get him straight up for a guy like Keon Coleman. If they are like, I need to rebuild, Terry's not a part of my future plan, you might be able to make that move, especially because Keon probably went towards the end of your first. You probably were a pretty good roster in the first place. But yeah, so that's the first guy on my list. The next guy I have here is Calvin Ridley, also 29 years old. Since DeAndre Hopkins got traded, he's averaging 20 plus points per game with two different quarterbacks at the helm. I had a list of stats here because somebody asked me, we were trade talking, and they were like, why should I take Calvin Ridley? And like now it seems like I'm trying to prop this guy up and then dump him, but I was just trying to answer the question. Do I have the stats right in front of me? Yeah, over the last 3 weeks for Calvin Ridley, he's top 10 in the following categories. For basic stats, it's fantasy points per game, he's 3rd. Targets, he's 4th. Receptions, he's 7th. Yards, he's 2nd. In advanced stats, so not just volume-based stats where some of the guys on week 9 or week 10 buys will get drowned out. or even just anomalistically high target share, he's had a PFF grade that's 10th in the league, yards per route run that's 9th in the league, and a target per route run that's number 1 in the league. So with D-Hop leaving, Ridley is the focal point of the Titans offense. He doesn't have any target competition to speak of. I mean, at least not until Treylon Burks comes back. He's been on IR for 4 weeks, 5 weeks now. As soon as he comes back, I expect Treylon to eat. But let's get back on task. Calvin Ridley, again, 29 years old, just like Terry McLaurin. He's had a very inconsistent year. Actually, last 2 years, he's been very much a boom bust caliber player. You could probably buy for a second. Maybe 2 seconds is too much. But I'd say my target price would be to creatively send like a second in a cheap young piece that maybe was promising, but isn't helping you right now. Like maybe like a Jalen Polk or Ray Davis or I don't know, somebody in that vein, kind of like what I said earlier, like a Jermaine Burton in a second for Calvin Ridley. It's probably, if the Ridley owner is looking to move off, that's probably going to get it done. Next one here is Jakobi Meyers. So over his last 5 weeks, he has had a 78.8 PFF grade, which is better than the 74 he had in weeks 1 through 5. And he's had a 2.15 yards per route run over that same span compared to 1.71 yards per route run in his first 5 weeks. He's only played 2 games. He only played 2 games in the first 5 weeks because of injury and buys, but he's got no Devontae Adams. He's now, again, the also focal point of that. Well, not focal point because Brock Bowers is there, but he's the number 1 receiver on the Las Vegas Raiders depth chart. I know he's not really a dynasty asset, which is why I put him 3rd on the priority list after Ridley and Terry, because I think those guys will be productive again next year. Jakobi Meyers is, I would fully expect the Raiders to do something at quarterback and something at wide receiver next year. So even though Devontae is gone for the rest of this year, I wouldn't expect much more. Target price for Jakobi would be, if I could send a second straight up, I probably would begrudgingly do it. I would rather send like a QJ in a 3rd, like a young underperforming asset and a 3rd to go get him would be ideal. Like if I could send Adonai Mitchell in a 3rd, I would do that. If I could send Jalen Polk in a 3rd, I would do that. At the end of the day, the price is probably going to be about a second, maybe a second plus, like a second and a 4th. But I'd be trying to do something a little bit more creative because I don't think he's going to retain that top dog status on his own offense like Terry and Ridley should next year. Next guy on this list I have is Darnell Mooney. He's 27 years old, so the youngest of this group of 4 receivers, and he's sneakily been a top 20 wide receiver on the year. He's wide receiver 19 overall, wide receiver 8 overall, and wide receiver 19 in fantasy points per game at 14.4. And I think he's probably the cheapest player in this realm because he's been absolutely dust for the last 2 full seasons after his 1,000-yard season in Chicago. Most managers who have him probably didn't spend a lot to get him. I think he was probably a 3rd or 4th round rookie pick back when he was a rookie. So it's not like anyone has this attachment point to his prospect status. He's tied to Kirk Cousins. There's no threat of incoming target competition in the future because with London, Bijan, and Pitts there and on rookie contracts, I don't foresee the Falcons spending up any more day 1 or day 2 capital on yet another target competition. So I just feel like his role is locked in as long as he keeps this up. I don't know if I could send 2/3 to get Darnell Mooney, I feel like that's a smash. So it's probably a 2nd and 3rd at this point. I just feel like he's optically not viewed as a dynasty asset when he probably should be. A 2nd and a 3rd is probably a smash too. Probably should be sending 2 seconds for Darnell. Probably should be willing to send 2 seconds for Darnell Mooney, but you wouldn't catch me doing that. I don't think I'm not saying it's smoke and mirrors. I think him and London actually work really well together because Darnell Mooney has this juice and Drake London has this toughness that really work together. And I don't know. I have too many Falcons already, so I won't be targeting Darnell Mooney. I don't want so much of that offense, but that would be one guy who I'd be looking for if I'm looking for a wide receiver. So next, let's move on to some running backs. The obvious ones are probably going to be too expensive. Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley are already probably on contenders, and which makes them basically off limits at this point. And they're certainly not going to be cheap buys for your playoff run. If you want to get Henry, Kamara, Mixon, Saquon, you're going to have to spend a first plus, maybe two firsts, like in the case of Saquon. But if you really are going to try to get them, I would be willing to send a younger running back in a tier up to get some of them. Like if I could send Bucky Irving in a first to go get one of them, I would. If I could send Tyrone Tracy in a first to go get one of them, I would. Those seem like a great one to a rebuilder would be Jonathan Brooks in a first for any of them. Very, very savvy trade. But yeah, let's move on. My first running back on this list that's probably a little bit more attainable is going to be Tony Pollard. He's 27 years old. He's averaging 14.2 points per game, which is 24th right now, that doesn't seem right. 24th at 14.2 seems high. I would expect that to be like wide receiver 12. Anyways, I'm going to check that right now before I mislead you guys. Let's see here. Players, leaders, running back, season, average. Oh, I guess it is. All right. Yeah, 24th in the league. He's getting the workload of an alpha, even with Tyjae Spears healthy, which makes him something that I would want to target down the stretch. But also having Tyjae Spears back healthy means that they're probably going to take some of the load off Pollard when they can, which should make him a decent play down the stretch. I wouldn't expect him to fizzle out because they should be able to cut into a little bit of his workload for some load management. The Titans have a decent schedule down the stretch. Most notably, they're facing the Jaguars twice, including in championship week. So he's definitely somebody who I would want to be targeting now with that in mind. So if you're like a 10-0, 9, 8+ win team, and I could send off my second and third for him, which would be like in that late second, late third, that's a smash. You're probably going to cost you 2 seconds in one quarterback, but the ideal target price there is second and a third. Next is Najee Harris, and he's sneaky young at 26 years old. I feel like he's been in the league for like 8 years and just been a plotter, but he's young. He's averaging 12.7 points per game, which is currently 29th. But over his last 5 weeks, specifically since they started, and it coincides with when they started Russ at quarterback, he's averaging 16 points per game, which would be closer to that wide receiver 1 level production. And I feel like I saw this on Twitter that, since Russ has come back, the number of times defenses line up with 8 players in the box to stop the run has decreased. So back when Fields was quarterback, there was no threat of Fields picking them apart routinely and regularly, where they could take some risks in pass protection and pass defense to really sell out and stop the run, because the Steelers have such a strong running game. Maybe not strong running backs, but a strong running game that they sold out to stop that. And now defenses can't do that because Russ is undeniably a better passer than Justin Fields and holds defenses accountable and makes them have to think twice about selling out to stop the run. And no one's been a better beneficiary of that besides George Pickens, but is Najee Harris. He's out-carried Warren considerably over the last 5 weeks, and the Steelers just seem to love him. He seems to fit their tougher run style, fits with that tough defense and that tough city. So, again, similar to Tony Pollard, target price would be a second and third. You're probably going to have to pay 2 seconds. I would not be paying a first for either of these guys. I guess maybe if I was a contender and I was like an 8+ win team, I would send off my playoff first for Najee, but I would need like a third back on top of Najee. But yeah, so that's the end of my list of competitive buys. I'm sure there are some competitive quarterbacks and tight ends out there, but you know my feeling on tight end. I feel like they're all crapshoots. So if you can't pony up and go get McBride or Bowers, the only other guy I guess I would be targeting right now would be Travis Kelce, and I don't know what his price. Honestly, I have no clue what his price is. I'm not paying a first for a 35-year-old guy. I don't think the Travis Kelce owner is going to accept the second unless they're a rebuilder, in which case they probably would have sold him a while ago. I can't imagine a rebuilder holding Kelce through the start of the season. Just doesn't make any sense. So Kelce is obviously a big target. I think he's going to be a stud down the stretch, but he's really hard asset to price. If he's on a contender, they're not selling him. So let's move on to the buy high lucrative dynasty assets. And these are the guys that I think you're buying for your playoff run, but also they can be dynasty staples. Whereas that previous list of like 7 or 8 guys I just mentioned, they're really not guys you're trying to build a team around. They're more like you're adding them cheap for your playoff run. These are guys you're going to add. They're going to be more expensive, but I think they're going to be dynasty mainstays for your teams as well. And the first one on this list, my number one buy is George Pickens. Now, I am a notorious George Pickens fader and hater. I've always said I thought he was shiny Gabe Davis, and I'm being proven wrong right in front of my eyes. He's 23 years old. He's just same age as Drake London. He's younger than Jamar Chase. He's just younger than Garrett Wilson. And he's locking in right now. I know it's obvious, but first 6 weeks of the season, he was averaging 10 points per game, a 72 PFF grade, 36th in the league, a 2.27 yards per route run, which was 14th in the league, which tells me he was efficient in his limited touches, probably had a lot of big plays because he's a big play merchant. But there just wasn't enough pass volume or on-target passes. And maybe he just also wasn't as motivated. The offense looked a little dysfunctional, didn't look like a smooth running machine. And we know how George Pickens has an attitude problem. But in weeks 7 through 10, since Russ took over, I know it's only a 3-game sample, but he's averaging 18 points per game, which would put him up in league with, only behind guys like AJ Brown, Nico, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson. But same points per game as like CeeDee Lamb right now. 18 points per game, a 91 PFF grade, which is first in the NFL, and a 3.17 yards per route run, which is third in the NFL. He's locked in as a dog, and I don't know if he's going to sustain this level at all times, but I mean, he's an end zone target, which I think can't be discounted, because too often we say, oh, we love this guy. If he just got touchdowns, he'd be great. Well, bitch, maybe there's a reason he's not getting touchdowns, and guys like George Pickens are. So my target price on him, obviously it starts with the first, and I think you're going to have to use another younger player to tier up to George Pickens if you really want to get him. Now, if George Pickens is on a rebuilder, you could probably send off 2 firsts and get him. But if he's on a fellow competitor or even a mid-tier team, they're probably not going to watch his picks alone. You're probably going to have to get savvy and send off a guy like Josh Downs in a first, or Cedric Tillman, Ladd McConkey, Tyrone Tracy, that type of player that's young, promising, has production, but not quite to the level of what we expect with Pickens going forward, plus a first, like a playoff first. I think that's a deal you could probably make. And I guess, obviously, if you're a Pickens owner, inversely start looking at deals like that as well. Next one on this list I have is Ken Walker. He just turned 24 years old, and he's had a handful of down weeks the last few weeks, which I think actually gives you a chance to buy him cheap. Not cheap. That sounds dumb, but cheaper than he should be. Because from my running back rankings video, I had him in my top tier with Bijan, Gibbs, and Breece Hall. Maybe that was a little aggressive and premature. If he's not in that tier with them, he belongs in a mini tier with Devon Achane right behind them. I mean, he had a 92 PFF grade, rush grade through his first 5 weeks up until his injury, and was averaging 20 plus points per game. He was averaging 5 plus targets per game. Week 6 through 10, he's at a 72 PFF grade. But I'm hoping he turns it around down the stretch here. My target price would be a first and second. Probably going to cost you 2 firsts to get him, but I'm just saying, like, my target deals. Like, obviously, you're never trying to give your absolute best nuts offer right away, because the other person always is going to ask for more. So my goal is really, how do I navigate a trade discussion? Again, to go back to a deal we talked about earlier, if I can give Jonathan Brooks and a first for Ken Walker, that's technically 2 firsts for him without necessarily giving up the security of a 2026 first or 2027 first. He's a guy I'd really want to be kicking the tires on, especially because I think he's going to help you down the stretch and obviously can be a mainstay of your dynasty teams for years to come. Now, the last guy here, more of a super flex buy, but in one quarterback, I think he's a sneaky buy right now too, and that's Drake Maye. He's 22 years old, and he's averaging roughly 16-ish points per game in the games he started and finished this year, not including a couple games that he came in the fourth quarter earlier this year. He's an absolute stud in the making, a dual threat quarterback. He's doing all of this with arguably the worst infrastructure on offense in football around him, between the offensive line, skill position players, offensive coaching. And the big thing here is that he's a dual threat quarterback. He's already put up, a 100-yard rushing game or a 90-yard rushing game this year. And he had one of the highest scramble rates in college. And I keep hearing this in videos, is that rushing quarterbacks aren't it's not a skill, it's a decision type thing. Like there are certain quarterbacks that have the skill to rush that just choose not to. And there are other quarterbacks that maybe don't have the skill too, but they rush more often and they end up getting more rushing yards in the end because it comes down to, it kind of reminds me of stolen bases in Major League Baseball. There are plenty of fast base runners that don't get a lot of steals because it's all about if you want to do it or not. I know it sounds so dumb the way I'm saying it, but it's true. And the fact that Drake Maye had the highest scramble rate of compared to Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts, Drake Maye has the highest scramble rate out of all of them in college. So my target price for him, I don't ever want to give up a first for a quarterback and one quarterback, save for guys like Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. At this point, you're probably going to need to spend that much. Like one late first is probably what it's going to take. If I have to send a pick, I just feel like as a contender, I'm not sending my 2025 first for Drake Maye. Doesn't make sense because I don't really see Drake Maye helping me down the stretch as much as I see him being potentially a franchise quarterback for years to come in the future. I'd be looking at sending 2 seconds or hoping that Drake Maye actually ended up on a contenders team that needs a quarterback. And then I try to send a guy like Brock Purdy for him or Justin Herbert or Jared Goff in a second, doing anything I can to say, hey, you need production now. I'll take production later. I'll even throw in a pick to help you down the road to replace your Drake Maye with next year's Quinn Ewers or whatever in the second. So that'd be what I'd be trying to do. Yeah, Jared Goff in a second would be something Baker Mayfield straight up would be something I'd be looking at doing. But yeah, so that's it for my trade targets that are for contenders and or dynasty buyers. The last category I have here is impaired assets. So I don't have any stats backing these up here. I'm just going to go through each guy, give a quick hit on why I think they're distressed and why I think they're still a good fantasy buy right now. I'm going to go off kind of just gut instinct on some of these. I have a few. I remember some numbers off the top of my head, but I don't have everything in front of me. First one I have is Rome Odunze. He's only 22 years old. He's in that down bad, horrendous Chicago Bears offense and system and franchise. And maybe that's a reason to actually avoid him. But, you know, he was regarded as easily the wide receiver 3 of this rookie class. And one quarterback, he should have been at the 103 at worst in every single draft. If I could buy him now for a single solitary mid to late 2025 first, it's a smash. If I could buy him for less than that, smash. If I could tier off a guy that's competitive to a contender that has Odunze and send him Devontae Smith for Rome Odunze, smash. If I could send T. Higgins for Rome Odunze in the second, smash. Like these are all just obvious trades. The next one I have here is Jonathan Brooks. 21 years old. I think we were all super optimistic that would have been back by now. It's now week 11. He still hasn't played in the NFL, but he was the best running back in the 2024 rookie class. And we've had a couple good running backs emerge, like Tracy and Bucky and Ray Davis. But yeah, he should be the best of all of them. And, you know, hoping that team, the Panthers, let the shackles off, give him some run down the stretch, but he's more of a guy that's going to help you next year, hopefully, and beyond. Hopefully, if I was trying to buy him, I'd be trying to send him a productive running back now, like a Chase Brown or a Tyrone Tracy, or probably I'd try to pay 2 seconds, but realistically, probably still need to send a first. And maybe this owner is willing to re-roll in this supposedly spectacular 2025 running back class. That's who I would be buying. Next one, Sam Laporta. I think it's pretty obvious that he's had a very down year. He's actually injured right now. The Laporta owner probably is fed up with him at this point, and they're probably a contender. I would be looking to kick the tires on Laporta. You might be able to get him for less than a first right now. If not, I'd be willing to send a playoff first for him and hope that he turns it around down the stretch. And if not, I think it's good process in the end. Like if there's tight ends of his caliber that do what he did his rookie year don't come around very often. I don't suspect that we'll see one in the 2025 class. So if your only hole going into next year is tight end, and you have a late first to dispose of, why not send it off for a guy like Laporta? Because you're not going to get a tight end with that pick. And, I mean, I guess maybe Colson Loveland, I think, is supposed to be pretty good, but I don't know. Next one here I have is Tank Dell. He's actually older than you would expect. 25 years old already in his sophomore year, but I still think he's great. I'm not really sure why he's having a down year, but I saw enough of him as a rookie where I'd still be going after him. I think he has like 16 points per game, or at least like 14 points per game last year in games that he actually started and finished. My target price again would be 2 seconds, probably going to cost you a late first, realistically, especially, or I think the most realistic situation is going to be tearing down to Tank Dell with a guy, the aforementioned Devontae Smith and T. Higgins types for Tank Dell in a second. Those are the types of deals you probably might be able to get done if that owner is getting frustrated with Tank Dell and really needs that stability at the top. You might be able to do like AJ Brown for Tank Dell in a first, or it might be, I don't know. I'm not sure, but you guys start thinking of your own creative deals to try to get Tank Dell packaged up. I don't think you're going to get a 1-for-1 deal for Tank Dell because of all the things I just said. That the owner probably saw what he did last year and goes, "I'm going to wait and see." But if you strategically tier down to him, I think they might be a bit more receptive. Next one here is Caleb Williams, and you guys have seen all the stats. He's having actually statistically a more ineffective first 9 starts of his career than even Bryce Young had, and we all have proclaimed Bryce Young is dead. So it's not looking good for Caleb. But my gosh, Caleb was supposed to be such a good. Caleb is such a good prospect. I think the problem is he's too much of an improviser, which works a lot in college when coverages break down and defensive linemen. You can outrun defensive linemen and skirt around them and dance in the pocket. You can't do that in the NFL, and he's learning that right now after getting sacked 9 times against the Patriots. You have to get rid of the ball. You have to go through your progressions. I don't think the offense in Chicago is doing him any favors, though. I don't see him have any quick hit bubble screens, slants, get him going, let him see the ball go through the net, let him get some easy high percentage throws off, pick up short yardage gains, give him more manageable 3rd and 3s. He's got all these 3rd and 7, 3rd and 9s where he's getting pressured and sacked, and it's like, man, they're not making it easy on him. What would I pay for him? Probably an early second, or if I have a bench quarterback that I'm not using right now, like a guy like Jared Goff or Brock Purdy, and they need more production out of their starter, I'd be willing to send those guys for Caleb and plus pretty easily. Next one I have on the list here is Travis Etienne. So he's, again, only 25 years old. He was RB3 last year. He's been banged up all this season, and the Jaguars picked up his 5th-year option because he was a first-round NFL draft pick. I think the ETN hate has gotten out of control to the point where, I think people are even saying he's worth less than a second. If you could spend a 3rd and go get Travis Etienne, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. That's the smash of all smashes. I think the realistic price is probably going to be 2 seconds or a second and another running back that's a bit more productive right now to a team that needs the production and is sick of watching this decrepit Jaguars team now led by Mac Jones, and that has the worst offensive line in football, or one of the worst offensive lines in football. I think the reservations around Tank Bigsby are a little bit overblown. I think he's had a great handful of carries this year, and he's a tough runner, but I don't think he's by any means the better running back than Travis Etienne. And I think if you could buy him for even a single late second as a contender, why not? It's so obvious. I think I'd be willing to spend up to 2 seconds on him. Probably not sending a first, but I think it's a good player to kick the tires on that should at least get an opportunity to start again next year. When hope that Jags team can't get any worse. So, and ETN should be healthier. Next I have is Trevor Lawrence, same team, same issue. He's also only 25 years old. I still believe in the kid. I think he's honestly just had the worst string of luck between team injuries, whether it's Christian Kirk or Dallas Goedert, Evan Ingram, ETN this year, ETN his rookie year, having the Urban Meyer year. He's just never had a chance to get it going. And I think somebody I would keep kicking the tires on, more so a Superflex buy. If I could buy him for, honestly, I don't know, a couple early seconds in Superflex for sure. In one quarterback, I mean, I don't even know what I'd pay, but I'd figure out what that price is and try to go get him and stash him for next year. I think he's going to be out for the year at this point. But last one I have here is Keaton Mitchell. He's only 24 years old. We saw what he could do from an efficiency standpoint. I would be willing to, if I lucked my way into a guy like Kareem Hunt, he's the type of guy I'd be willing to sell for Keaton Mitchell. I think Mitchell has the juice to be a fantasy superstar asset. It just he's the type of back that needs everything to materialize just right for him. And you probably get Keaton in a piece, Keaton plus for Kareem Hunt. Probably get Keaton in a 3rd for Kareem Hunt. And Yeah, type of guy. He's the perfect epitome of a dart throw that I'd be willing to make. He reminds me a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs when you watch him run. And obviously, he's not even close to the caliber of player Jahmyr Gibbs is, but his stylistically and size and speed remind me of him. So yeah, that's it for all my dynasty buys. I guess can't really do a buy show without talking a little bit about sells, so I'll keep this quick. But the one thing I wanted to highlight is that I think now is the time, if you're going to be selling, is to sell any young, I use air quotes here, young running back that might carry some value or production right now and has optimism around next year, but where the team most likely will be adding to their running back rooms because the 2025 running back class is so strong. And so the guys I'm talking about here, and they're all 25, 26 years old, are Tyrone Tracy, Chase Brown, Rico Dowdle, Brian Robinson, J.K. Dobbins, and Javonte Williams. Now, next year's running back class is supposed to be so deep and so strong. I imagine at least half the league will be adding another running back from this class to their running back room. And at least 8 to 10 of them are going to be challenging their starter for the starting job. Now, that does not mean each of these running backs I just listed are going to lose their jobs. I just am saying I don't know which of these are going to. I think the obvious candidates are guys like Rico Dowdle and Javonte Williams. But we all saw what happened years ago when teams would have a good running back and then draft another running back the following year. And we're all like, what the fuck is going on? So I'm not saying all these guys are going to lose their jobs or they're candidates, but they are candidates to where if a guy like Ashton Genty falls to the mid to late first round and the Bengals see him and go, holy fuck, this is generational running back talent or a very good running back talent, we're going to take him. And Chase Brown is now dead. Rico Dowdle is probably the most obvious sell on the list, and the Cowboys are probably going to replace him. And I think everybody in your league knows that too. So maybe he's not a perfect sell, but Brian Robinson. I would imagine the Commanders, if given the opportunity to add a full 3-down back to their system, makes sense, they'll do it. So I think these are all guys I would use as candidates to trade. I think it's good process to include these guys in trades to go tier up for those top running backs we mentioned earlier, or to tier down from, or to trade cross positionally. Again, you don't have to trade them. I think I'm just trying to think of creative ways to protect myself against this 2025 running back class, which seems to be like the grim reaper of running backs classes. There's going to be obvious situations like the Raiders, no matter what, are going to have a better running back from this rookie class next year. I don't know. The Saints probably, I don't know. Kamara's not that old, but there are some obvious situations like the Vikings, and there's not obvious situations like these. Like the Giants could be a perfect candidate, or top of the second round, they take, Quinshawn Judkins, and now Tyrone Tracy is dead. I mean, Tracy's already 25 years old as a rookie, which makes him not very young, but you're probably wondering why I didn't mention guys like Rachaad White, Travis Etienne, Bucky Irving, Tank Bigsby. I think they're interesting to me because while they fit the criteria of being young running backs that aren't necessarily stud running backs, their RB rooms are so complete that I actually don't see their teams adding any new competition to those running back rooms. So I see them more as holds or even buys than sells. But yeah, and then the obvious running backs that are going to get replaced, like I just mentioned, they're not necessarily sells because everybody knows they're going to get replaced by next year's running back class. So the only other obvious sells I think is any tight end not in the top 3. So I think if you're holding on, besides Bowers and McBride, besides those two, I'll be willing to sell Kincaid, Pitts, Kittle, Andrews, Kelce, Kraft. I can't even remember all the tight ends. Hawkinson. I would sell all of them for any of the other tight ends with a plus. Or if I have 2 of these guys, I'm willing to sell any of them for any of the dynasty buys I mentioned earlier. If I could pivot Hawkinson plus something for Pickens, I'm doing it. Like if I could sell Kraft and a plus to go get Ken Walker, absolutely smash on the spot. Depends on how your league values tight ends and your league format. Our league is moving to a 1.5 tight end premium next year, so I think that's what makes them a little bit more attractive of a buy across the league. But yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to get this show out hopefully within the hour. Good luck this week. And for those of you who are making playoffs, I hope your teams are solidified. For those of you who are making playoffs, time to go make some moves, time to shake things up, time to start thinking about your 2025 season. Anyways, peace and love, guys.